Hello, welcome to this session about Kubernetes and security. My name is Alain Regnier. I'm the CTO of a company called Kubolabs. I actually came to Devoxx many years ago. By any chance, did someone see my talk many years ago? It was a very, very packed room, probably one of the most packed room that you've ever had at Devoxx. No, nobody? Okay, I was actually showcasing the Google Glass at the time, and I was one of the first person doing development on the Google Glass. I switched many years ago. So I'm a technical architect. I'm GDE Cloud, which means Google Developer Expert. I never worked for Google, but I've signed some NDA and I have some relationship with them, which led me to work with Kubernetes a long time ago. And so Kubolabs, what we do is we develop software to simplify access to Kubernetes. One about auditing Kubernetes cluster called QBScore. One about supervision of your cluster, focusing on the real problem that we face every day. And one about setting up your Kubernetes cluster without having to be tied with the underlying platform. We do some consulting, etc. Just who has never done any Kubernetes? Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure. So it's going to be a bit difficult to talk about 7 tools in 30 minutes. I'm going to try to do that. The whole idea is to show some of the tools we use every day in relation with security. Some of them you may know, some of them you may not know. Hopefully you'll get something out of it. A few words about security itself. You've probably heard about the many stories. Tesla, who ended up mining cryptocurrency on their cluster, or Kubeflow issue, or even some malware on the Windows side, all related to Kubernetes. This has become a very hot topic. By show of hand, who has a Kubernetes cluster in production? Okay, half. Okay, so when we talk about security, the first few things we think about are first sensible data, things like passwords, key, etc. We also think about infrastructure, the underlying virtual machines and network. If they are not secure correctly, someone could get in. One of the aspects we also think about is the configuration of the cluster. If we don't pay attention the way we configure it, we may leave some very big holes, especially if we leave default values with cloud providers. How many of you are using cloud providers? Okay, so quite a few. So what do you do when you create a new cluster and you fill up a form and you have questions that you don't know how to answer? Usually what we do, we just leave the default values. And default values are pretty bad from a security point of view. Other aspects we deal with are authorization. We'll talk a bit more about that. But there are other aspects that we sometimes forget. For example, the workload themselves that we deploy on the cluster and the way they are configured. The lack of policies, establishing company policies and enforcing those policies can lead to security issues. Sometimes components fail, and the fact that a component responsible for some security aspect has failed or is down is going to be a big issue. Finally, there are some best practices that people should follow, but most of the time when we check with our customers, we realize that they don't know very well the best practices to follow, or they just don't follow them correctly. We'll talk more about it. So first tool I wanted to talk about is Vault. I won't spend too much time on it. Who is using Vault today? Okay, so maybe I'll spend a bit more time. Vault is a tool to manage secrets and protect sensitive data. Very important to understand. It allows to securely store things like token, passwords, and there are different ways to access them. The first one is via direct network connection from your application. You could also use secret injection thanks to the Vault agent, which would act as a sidecar inside your pod. And using annotation, the secret will be injected. Another way would be to use ephemeral volumes thanks to the CSI driver. This is a bit newer. Not so many people have used that yet, but this is a nice way also to integrate security. But when you think about it, why do I need that? What's wrong with Kubernetes secrets? Kubernetes secrets can be encrypted at rest. Also, we can restrict who can access those secrets. But one thing you have to keep in mind is if you look at a secret on a Kubernetes cluster, for example, doing a get secret, the name of the secret, and -o YAML, you can see the string here, which is the secret itself. The problem is this is not encrypted. This is only encoded in base 64. So just by executing this command here, you are able to retrieve the secret value. Okay, so for those who didn't know that, by default, the secret on a Kubernetes cluster, they are not encrypted. That's why we use external tools such as Vault. Second tool I want to present is QBScore. I talked a bit about it already. It's an automated solution to perform an audit of your Kubernetes cluster. It's something that we built at Kubolabs. The idea is that we run realistic scenarios that can actually create resources in order to verify the configuration and the security of your cluster. It's based on many years of Kubernetes consulting. And the whole idea is that you're going to compute a global score for your cluster. And you can then compare with other clusters that you have, or you can work on improving the score of your cluster. It's focused on cluster configuration and health, security, and best practices. Score and scenario are free, but you can also purchase a detailed report if you want. So just let me show you in a few seconds what it looks like. So basically, it's as simple as providing a kubeconfig file. What it does is that it's going to connect on your cluster thanks to the kubeconfig file, and we'll start running all its scenarios. If needed, we can tunnel everything through an SSH tunnel. So if your Kube API is not directly available on the internet, it can be accessed. And after executing, so it's going to take 20, 30 minutes to execute, you get a report like that where you have a global score for your cluster. And for each area, you have some information about the scenario that worked and those that did not work. And we have, I don't know if you can see, yeah. We have a large section about security scenarios. As you can see on that cluster, which is a test cluster, several of them failed. Things like insecure volume restrictions or Kube API exposure on a public IP, et cetera, which are all things that you may not consider when you set up your cluster, when you start working with your cluster, but it's a good way to really get back to what's wrong or what could be wrong on your cluster. I'm going to come back here. Okay, next one is called QBScan. Who has used QBScan yet? Nobody? Oh yeah, okay, a few. So QBScan is a tool very interesting that allows you to analyze your cluster for risky authorization. As you probably all know, we're using RBAC for Kubernetes. Basically, it helps identify permissions that are too broad and that could be exploited by attackers. Authorization dealing with roles, role bindings, cluster role bindings, pods, containers, pods with access to secret data. And the whole idea is that it will help you maintain the principle of least privilege. Who knew the principle of least privilege? Okay, so the others, please go and check it out. Try to understand what it means. Basically, it says that a subject should be given only the privilege needed to complete its task. So try to give as few authorization as possible, and then just add more as needed. So let's look a bit about how it works. First thing is that you have to retrieve QBScan from the Git repository. Then you will build a container image doing a Docker build. This is one of the easiest ways to use it. There are other ways to use it. Then what you need is you need to access your cluster. So in order to access your cluster, you will need to retrieve the token of a service account. If possible, a service account that has a lot of authorization. This way you are sure to be able to gather all the needed information. And then you will simply run the container using the token that you've extracted here. You will end up inside the container. Next thing is when the fun begins. Basically, you will be able to check all the service accounts on the cluster and check which one have too many authorization. So the result that you can see here is a list of service accounts present on the system with a priority like high, critical, or other levels, which already give you some information about those service accounts. It's very difficult manually to go and do that. So this tool is very practical for that. Another thing that you can do is you can connect and check the rules for a specific service account. So if I take this one called KSA admin, I just execute the commands, specify this parameter, and it returns me the fact that it actually has a cluster role with basically a lot of rules. So this service account is very, very, very powerful, probably much more than what you really need for the application. Other thing that you can do is, so you can do it also for other existing service accounts. Maybe you are using metric server and you know how to use it. You can get the whole list of rules that this service account will have. Another thing you can do is you can check what we call hot pods. Hot pods are pods that have privileged accounts, basically meaning that they are allowed to do things that they probably should not. In that particular case, it's okay, but if one of your developers is installing something on the cluster and you're not very sure what it does, you can use that tool. Next one is Falco. Who has used Falco? Okay, very few also. So Falco is a threat detection engine. What it means is that it's going to detect at runtime what's going on by observing the behavior of the applications. The way it does that is that it will analyze system calls against a list of predefined rules and basically generate events. So if you have predefined rules for specific aspects of security, you will receive notification when those rules are kicked in. What's important is that you can also audit the Kubernetes logs, the Kubernetes audit logs, which contains a lot of information. And when I say a lot, I really mean a lot. Usually it's not usable because there are way too many logs in that file. So Falco supports it. And it's based on eBPF. Now, if you look how it actually works, basically, Falco is simply retrieving, analyzing all the system calls, the logs activity of your Kubernetes cluster, and based on the rules, will generate events. It's actually becoming even more useful when you use something called Falco Sidekick, which is a very simple daemon that you run next to it, that will be able to retrieve those events and forward them to your application of choice, be it Slack, Mattermost, Discord, Prometheus, PagerDuty, or anything like that. So very practical, very useful to use it together. So how do we do with Falco? Very simple scenario. First, we need a cluster. So I created a very simple cluster here with 2 nodes. The first thing is to add the repository for Falco security, to do a Helm repo update to update the charts. And then you have to install Falco. So quick note about that. Who's using Helm in the room? Okay, a lot. Helm is a very practical tool. I actually do like it. I know there was a talk yesterday, Helm versus Customize. I don't know if some of you attended the talk. One of the problems is that if you follow the documentation, even with Helm, very often your installation just doesn't work for tools like that. Why? Because you need to add specific overridden values for your target environment. So Here, for example, you have to set eBPF enable to true, driver can to eBPF, and TTY to true, if you're running on JKE, on Google Cloud. If you're running in a different environment, you may not need those values. That will install Falco for you. Then what you can do is simply check the pods that have been created. It's a daemon set. So let me switch here. Try to do that. Okay, so here I'm on a cluster. I'm using Tmux. I'm on a cluster that I created for that. Can you all read? Or is it too small? Okay. So I'm connected on a cluster, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply I'm going to check the pods that have been created in the Falco namespace, and then I will simply tail the logs of those two pods. Okay. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to do something that could be considered as dangerous. For example, I'm going to create a pod on my cluster with a bash running in it, and I'm going to connect to bash. So let me just remove this one. I'm executing my command. This is simply creating a pod on my cluster with a bash shell. And I can notice here that a shell was spawned in a container with an attached terminal. Basically, I'm getting a real-time notification about this issue. As I mentioned earlier, you can use the Falco sidekick in order to get this notification in Slack, PagerDuty, Prometheus, whatever you want, which makes it even more helpful. Another thing I'm going to do now, I'm connected inside my shell. I'm going to try to, for example, I'm going to try to create a file. Okay, so here I can see a notification where basically they saw that I was trying to create a new file under user bin. This is a rule. You can define and override your own rules. You can use predefined rules. But basically, in real time, it's able to realize what's going on. OK, back to the slides. OK, next tool I want to talk about is GCR with vulnerability scanning. GCR is the Google Container Registry. There are other products that does similar things. I just like the way, how convenient it is to use when you use GCR for your registry. Basically, what it does, it's a registry for your container images, but you can enable scanning on them, and it will check all those images that you push for vulnerabilities. As you probably know, if you create a container image, if you create a container image 6 months ago, and you're still running in production with that image, it's very likely that some CVE have been published, and that there are some security issues in your container image. What it does is it will automatically scan image when you push them. It costs 20 cents per scan container image, but it's only charged at the beginning. If you go back a few months later, you don't pay anymore, and you have the list of CVE that increases. For example, here, this is the view. Can you see? Yeah. This is the view of the container registry itself, where we can see images inside the registry, and we can see on the right here. Let me put the mouse. Yeah. We can see a list of vulnerabilities, and if I dig into one of them, then I can have all the details with the severity, the CVE reference, the name of the package, and a lot of other information automatically. And then I can simply dig to get even more details and get the link. For example, if it's a Red Hat distribution based, you can find the real details about the CVE itself. So Very convenient way because you don't have to install anything, you have to configure anything. It's there, you just check the box and it's enabled. There are a lot of other solutions, Claire and Arbor and so on that can do things like that. X-Ray also. But what I like here is it's very convenient. It works right away. Okay, next one. We talked about policies earlier and how they could impact the security of your cluster. Who's using OPA? Okay, nobody. Whoa. Okay, so you definitely need to check it out. It's Open Policy Agent. It's a policy engine that allows you to apply policies on the cluster at different levels by decoupling the policy from the business logic. You don't have to take care of the policies inside your code. It uses a language called Rego, which is a declarative policy language to define new policies. And in the context of a Kubernetes cluster, it uses a component called Gatekeeper. Have you heard of Gatekeeper? No, really? Nobody? Okay, a few. That allow you to basically say, I don't want this resource to be created. You do an apply with a new resource, but it doesn't follow this policy or these things that I want to authorize. I don't want it to be accepted. And it's fully integrated into Kubernetes in order to enforce those policies. It helps with compliance and also audit. When you have audit requirements, some businesses require that. And we can enforce very simple constraints on the resources. For example, we could say, I have 5 different teams working on the cluster, potentially in different namespaces. I want team A to have a specific label on all their resources, and team B have a different label. We can enforce that very easily with OPA. Now, it's not so simple to use. I have to warn you. Maybe it's why nobody's using it today. It's still interesting to start working with it, or at least to learn how to use it, because you have predefined policies that are very good, and you can simply apply them. So the relation between OPA and Kubernetes is this gatekeeper that I mentioned, where basically we do an apply on the API server, and OPA decide whether or not it should accept it and send an admission review response to accept or not the resource. Let's look at a simple example. Let's say you want to enforce trusted images. You want to say, I want to allow on my cluster only those images. Well, we can, after installing OPA and doing all the configuration, we can add a new constraint like this one, where basically we will allow only those 4 images at the bottom. Okay, next one, Supervisor, it's the last one. It's a tool that helps supervise your Kubernetes cluster. What I mean by that is that you may have a monitoring solution like Datadog. Who's using Datadog? Okay, like Stackdriver, who changed name, or I mean, there are a lot of different solutions to monitor your cluster. What they do is that they grab a lot of metrics, a lot of data, very, very, very often, and then they do some intelligence on those data. Who's using Prometheus and Grafana? Okay, good. The main issue with those tools is that they are good to debug, to work deeply into what's going on your cluster, but only the DevOps guy or the specialist guy can really use them regularly because it's a job in itself to use them. So Supervisor, what it does, it's a very simple way to access information about potential problem on your cluster. It's based on our experience with many years of consulting with a lot of different customers, with what are the most common problems that may occur, and with their impact on security. There is no complex configuration, no language to learn. You get simplified alerting, where basically you can get notification when some of those problems appear. Who has used Alert Manager? I saw that a lot of people are using Prometheus. Okay, Who likes configuring Alert Manager and creating new alerts? Yeah, don't be shy. Yeah, okay. Me neither. So anyway, in that case, we simply check the alerts we want to receive, and it's subscription based. So let me show you. Let's go back here. Okay, can you see? Yeah. Okay, so it's a simple tools with green, yellow, red marks. Normally everything should be green. This is a lot of test cluster. Basically you have one view of all your cluster. So even the project manager, the tech lead, the IT director can use a tool like that because he will not forget from one month to another how to use it. Someone that you teach how to use Grafana, and then you leave him for 3 months and he comes back 3 months later to try to use Grafana and see what you showed him, you can be sure it's going to be lost. Unless you use it often, you're going to be lost. So the idea is you just click on one of the cluster, and you have a more detailed view of what's going on your cluster with potential resource problem. For example, do you have pods that don't have requests on your cluster? Do you have pods that are in error? Do you have pods that don't define probes? Do you have certificate on your cluster that will expire very soon, which can also lead to security issues? So on this one, a lot of things green. Maybe I should show a different one. Yeah, so here, for example, we can see right now on the cluster, we have 3 pods in error, and we have all 3 pods that show up here. We have one pod that is not schedulable for many reasons, most likely because of resource request. We have a lot of pods that are missing probes and so on. The whole idea is to give you an easy way to find those potential problems on your cluster. Normally, everything should be green. Maybe I can. Yeah, on this one we can see there is a node down. Another thing that we can see which would be interesting. Yeah, here. Have you ever had a problem where you are trying to schedule a workload on your cluster and it simply cannot be scheduled anywhere, even though the CPU of the cluster is like 5% usage? So basically your cluster is sleeping, but you're unable to schedule a workload. Well, it's because of your reservation. Here we have, for example, a warning that we have a 70% level of reservation for the cluster for CPU, whereas it's only using 14%. So this will prevent you from scheduling new pods, or this will kick in the autoscaler if you are on a cloud provider. So you will end up paying even more for your cluster. Okay, let's go back. Okay, so just 1 second. I'll go back to this slide here. Okay, so at the beginning, we look at what could cause security issue on your cluster, and we've identified some tools that we're actually using every day that help tackle all those areas. The important thing is, don't just think that security is about authorization and sensible data. It's about a lot more. A pod that is crashed, especially a system pod, could lead to security issue. A configuration problem could also lead to security issues. A lack of policies, or just you create the policies but nobody is enforcing them, could lead to security issues. And that's it for me. Just show you the last slide, if I can. Okay. Hold on. Okay, so if you have any question, you have my email address here. If you want to audit your cluster, feel free to test it, QBScore.io. There is a special coupon with 50% off for the full report if you want it, with the code DEVOX22. And if you want to do the free trial of Supervisor, the supervision tool, this is the URL. Thank you for your time.